Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. But most importantly, welcome. Welcome to this webinar. It's the latest in a series of sessions, which is part of the Agile 20 Reflect Festival. And in this session, we are going to try to answer the question, is the Agile Manifesto still fit for purpose? So I think most of the people who are on this, call will probably be aware that it's now been 20 years since the Agile Manifesto was created back in February 2001. And since that time, a lot of organizations have tried to adopt its values and adopt its principles in order to improve their ways of working. And I think it's fair to say there have been varying degrees of success in those adoptions. And this is sort of in spite of the fact there's been a series, a lot of books, a lot of blog articles, conferences, meetups, whole series of sessions to examine this. So really here, what we're here to sort of look at really is has the manifesto stood up to the test of time? So without further ado, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves because we have, as I say, assembled a panel of experts to talk about this topic this evening. So if I can start, we'll try and do this alphabetically, shall we? Chris, Ari, I beg your pardon. Can we start with you?
Me?
Yes. Could you just introduce yourself, please?
Okay, Ari van Bennekom. Good evening from the Netherlands, everybody. I'm one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto. I think that's the reason I'm invited here. Still working every day in the field on Agile and Agile transformations with humanity. And I love my job.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Chris, can I ask you to go next?
Good evening, folks. So Chris Stone here, over in the UK. I go by the virtual Agile coach, so I'm actively Agile coaching also. Big fan, obviously, well, Agile in general. I was sold on it back in 2012, and I've loved it ever since. And yeah, it feels like a great opportunity, given it's been 20 years since it was incepted, the Agile Manifesto, to reflect on whether it is still fit for purpose. So great to be here tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Helen, over to you.
Hi, my name's Helen Meek. I don't know why I'm here, but I love Agile and I'm definitely one of the Kanban girls out there now. But I've been doing Kanban since 2008 and I've just noticed that my original mentor is in the audience. So hello, Margaret, I'm excited to see you.
Thank you very much. And Robin?
Hi, I'm Robin Hyman. I'm an Agile coach. My background is as an engineer. That was my introduction as a young software engineering grad in about 2003. That was my introduction to Agile. Yeah, I'm an Agile coach now. I use it every day. Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. And then finally, my name's David Smith. I'm also an Agile coach. I work for a company called BGSS, and we've sort of worked for a number of years helping a number of organizations really sort of take on, help them to deliver value to their customers and also to help create a kind of a happier, more purposeful workplace by using these sort of Agile Manifesto and the values and the principles. So I'm going to start us off. I mean, one of the things that we quite often get called in to help clients with is they say, well, we'd like to be agile. But in fact, I think it's fair to say that perhaps that's not really what they are looking to achieve. And in fact, agile isn't the end state. It's something else that they're looking for. Can anybody sort of start us off by talking us through the sort of benefits that people expect to see from taking on these ways of working?
General spoken, I mean, what's...
Yeah,
Robin, you go. You have an idea, right?
I was just going to say about my own experience that I was a young developer, and I had a boss who changed his mind about stuff a lot. I wasn't in a big group or anything. I was a single IT department, as it were, one-man band. But that was my introduction. My boss changed his mind all the time. I was struggling with responding to that change, and I got someone introduced me to the XP book, and that really changed things for me, and that really got me going. So for me, I had a specific objective, which was to cope with the change from my boss and make sure I was delivering what he wanted. So yeah, that was it from my perspective. Now we see it from clients, they tend to want to go faster or optimize their software delivery process in general.
If you go to that purpose, I have to go back for myself to the mid-90s, right? When I started working in a different way. And for me then, and I started in 1994, I very consciously changed the way of working because I wanted to deliver value. We were doing a lot, traditional projects, very often delivering something that people never asked for, were not happy with, and that was not helping the organization. And that's what I still do. The original thought of bringing value earlier to your client, whoever the client is, internal or external. Chris, I can see on your face you want to say something.
Always got things to say. The first thing I want to say is Robin clearly didn't get the memo about our black glasses brigade. All the panelists have got black glasses and you forgot yours, so you're letting us down, buddy. Yeah, from my perspective, I guess in my experience, when I've been working with clients who want agility, often it's this buzzword. They say we want to be agile, and it's not necessarily always for the right reasons. They may just be doing it because others are doing it. They may be saying, oh, agile is going to solve all our problems. It's going to be a panacea. It's going to fix things for us. And in my experience, actually, it's not going to fix everything. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to be a silver bullet, but it will expose those problems quicker. It will allow you to learn faster. And that to me is where it can help you get the most value and benefit. And I love Ari's bringing us back to value. That's to me where it should be, but I don't always see that.
I think for me, it's about the value, so I won't repeat that. But what is the problem that they're trying to solve? I laughed when Robin said about working faster because I have this tongue-in-cheek motto, which is work harder, work faster, work cheaper, which is sometimes what people really want to have. But for me, it's about what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Is it the value to the customer? Is it about being more nimble and responsive and how we can get work out there? Is it responding to changing markets? And I think that's one of the key questions that you want to be asking when you get started. Someone may phone up and say, we want to do this agile thing, but what's the root cause? There has to be the thing that they're trying to achieve in their company.
Yeah, and I think that value point is well made, and I certainly echo that. I think the other little bit for me as well is that I think a lot of people don't really enjoy their work, and I think there's a sort of a disengagement in the workforce that troubles me a little bit. And I think, if I'm honest, I was one of those disengaged employees for a while. There was a sort of a bit of a bleak spot in my career, and I think that's one of the things that Agile can help with in terms of actually re-engaging your workforce, and as a result, getting the best out of them, and getting the best out of your people from a sort of creativity and a commitment and a focus perspective. And so I think that can be really valuable.
And that's something I'm a huge proponent of this. So one of my values, work can absolutely fun if you allow it to be. If you put in a little bit of creativity, if you try different ways of doing things, if you embrace that, I find that those you're working with resonate with it. They like it. You can do themed retrospectives. You can make time for person interaction and meetings. It doesn't have to be just work. It can be fun if you make a lot of time for it.
And I was loving your new themed retro, Chris, that you released today on LinkedIn. So definitely worthwhile checking out. But I think also Agile gives people the ability to really kind of surface the problems that are wrong, and then be able to start trying solving some of these things for themselves, which is kind of what we want them to do, isn't it? And that makes it fun.
One of the things that I know is I like Daniel Pink, I follow him in the stuff on human motivation. And there's this little video of his, I think it's more than 10 years old. And it's about motivation, and it's autonomy, mastery, purpose, right? And those three are embedded in agile working. I can tell you, when we wrote the manifesto, we were not so aware of this, right? We loved the way we worked ourselves. We saw the success. Teams are happy, also not always, because that change is difficult. But what you know is that in the end, those three pillars of Daniel Pink's statement, they are motivating people. And I think that's what Agile brings. But we didn't aim for that one when we wrote the manifesto. But it comes with it. Very good.
So
Very
what
happy.
were your aims, Ari? What was the thing that was on the forefront of the group's mind?
Well, there was not one aim, as far as I know. I didn't talk to everybody about this later on, but my aim was, okay, I need to get value to the market, value to my client. I was in the mid-90s doing projects as a technical designer or something in the public sector. So you spent the people's money, and there was so much waste going on. That was a disgrace. Still is very often, by the way. And that was my driver to start working in another. How can you make sure that you don't make all those mistakes, the misunderstandings and the bugs and the inefficiencies and the toll gates and the waiting time and that kind of shit? But if you talk, for example, to James Grenning, James is an engineer, and that's what he will say to you if you ask him now. I'm an engineer, and he was focusing like, how can we deliver better code? He was on the quality side. Now the point is, quality also brings delay. And if you have handover from one group to people to another group of people in the silos, you create misunderstandings. If you hand over information, that is a delay. Inefficiency with toll gates is a delay. So the moment that you can do the right thing without all the delays, that's where you help the client the most. In the end, we all had our ankle, to make the client happier. That's what you read in the manifesto. But I think our starting point could for all of us, I don't know exactly for all of us, but be different one. Is it value? Is it the efficiency? Or Scrum is very much focusing on efficiency. Or James with XP is a lot focusing on quality.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's sort of quite, there has to be an underlying goal that people are looking for by adopting these ways of working. I think there is that sort of slight misapprehension sometimes that it is a goal in itself to become agile. But I just sort of, moving us along now. So if we these various elements, these various things that that people are looking for from agile, then what do we think in organisations really helps that? What do we think helps them get along? Be it that they're looking to improve, getting value to their customers more quickly, improve quality, improve efficiency. What sort of things do we think help the organisations?
In terms of the practices that you apply, or to make the change? What do you mean exactly, David?
So in terms of it could be the practices they apply, or what sort of intrinsic in organisations that can help with these with adopting these methods or these values and these principles. Are there sort of things that we find within when we sort of engage with our customers? Are there things that we find that can really help with this, that we can sort of flag up as examples of things which can make the adoption of these values and principles easier and more successful?
I mean, I certainly talk about coachability at all levels. It's one of the things that, is right from the off, because it shouldn't just be a kind of like a team level thing. It needs to be a whole organizational consideration, and that's technology, non-tech, that's the leadership team that kind of supports and helps and drives the ambitions. And so there has to be this openness and this ability to be able to learn for themselves, even though they may be at that kind of top. Because through that coaching, then you can have the leadership, and the leadership needs to be strong in terms of, actually, it's okay to do this, and it's okay to fail, and we're going to here to support you, and we're going to learn together, and we're going to evolve together. So I think that coachability is quite an important thing.
Yeah, to build on what Helen's saying there, I think for me it's that willingness to learn. It's embracing the unknown and just diving into that. Obviously, experimentation going hand in hand with that. I don't tend to like fail fast, because I know it's a common term that people use, but in my experience, particularly leadership, they don't like the word failure. It's a dirty, stigmatized word. And actually, I tend to say, right, don't think about failure. Just think about learning fast and learning often instead. But yeah, the desire to learn for me is absolutely huge in getting towards agility.
Yeah, I'd kind of echo that really, because for me it was an openness to experimentation, which I think is really just paraphrasing what Chris and Helen have just said. It's just that willingness to try new things, and leadership support as well. I think if leadership just think it's something for the teams, that's a bit of a hurdle. So I think they need to be kind of on the bus as well.
Yeah, because not only do organizations need to kind of learn and evolve, we need to change the way that we do things, like, you know, outcome-driven deliveries. Lots of organizations are using OKRs. These kind of stem from the kind of the business discovery part of organizations, where deciding what the organizational goals are. So there's still lots of new things that can be learned at different levels, but also, you know, thinking about, you know, traditional KPIs versus some of these new ways of doing it, focusing on the value that Ari's talking about, you know, that's putting some of the motivations into the reasons why we do what we do.
What I you know, the fail fast and the experimentation. I think in the 90s, you know, all of us were experimenting to get the improvements, but now a lot of people forget there is a lot of stuff that's working, and we know it's there. You know, there's your practice when you get to quality and you do things like, you know, pair programming or refactoring, it works. Jenny is asking a question about what is your anticipated value outcome, and the product owners find it really difficult to answer. I don't understand that, because if you can't answer it, you don't start the work, because you only start to work when you know the value, otherwise you don't make an investment. Now, finding that value is a skill. That's also one of the practices, right? You need to find that value first. And that means that you have maybe to, you know, deep dive with people from the business to see what the pain is and which improvement that you need to bring, or what the opportunity is, and what you have to bring to make that happen. Right, but a lot of practices are there. So I'm very much a supporter of the agnostic agile, which means, hey, whatever problem that you have, there are so many practices, either focusing on quality or focusing on the efficiency or focusing on getting the value. Just know, and this is why I think an agile coach is not an easy job, because you have a massive body of knowledge, right, that you need to know to really be an agile coach to help teams in every situation. But then you have already so much there ready for you, waiting. You can just take it and use it instead of experimenting. And I don't like failing at all, zero. But if I fail, I want to fail fast, because then I can improve very fast, right?
No one likes failing.
Yeah.
What some people doesn't work for others as well, or some groups and teams. So I'd sort of caveat it with a sort of it's context specific, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in the toolbox, there's a number of different patterns from Agile, Lean, all of the different methods, and it's about understanding which ones you pull from, which ones you blend, which ones you change. Or actually, I really love it when you can innovate new ones from the start with these organizations.
Of course.
This is actually one of the.
Sorry, you go. Now you go, Chris. Sorry.
I was going to say, so from my perspective, this is my goal when I come in and work with any new company. It's not to force feed the latest Spotify model or safe framework or anything like that. It's to understand what their problem is, what outcomes they're looking for, and help them find what flavor of Agile works for them. And if that means borrowing a little bit from Scrum, a little bit from Kanban, and you know, ultimately finding their own version of Agile, perfect. And that's why, coming back to what Ari said, agnosticism fits more with what I do. But yeah, that whole kind of copy and paste cookie cutter style of doing Agile, I don't think particularly works.
It's an interesting question though, on that purpose of the sense of an outcome, because quite often, you know, in my experience, I've found that what the organization or the group that you're working with is trying to achieve isn't very well understood. In fact, that can be quite a big challenge, actually, sort of really nailing that down, because, you know, it comes back to the point you were making about Dan Pink and his autonomy, purpose and mastery, Ari. Without that purpose element, it is difficult to galvanize the team. So I'm sort of curious, I mean, in terms of driving out that outcome, I've sort of, has that something that you've sort of struggled with yourselves? And if you have you sort of come up with techniques to help with that?
Yeah. I had a funny situation. I think it was 2007, because I represented the SDM when we wrote the manifesto, very value driven. And we had sort of a nice setting in I think it was the Van Gogh Museum, and we had a panelist, and there was a guy interviewing us, and it was about this. And then one of the others, supposedly very experienced Agile people, said, "Oh, you know, that value thing, I understand what you mean, but 9 out of 10 it's impossible to quantify the value that you need." I said, "Well, it's possible that you have run into those situations, but I do it since 1994. And I've been able, every single situation, to quantify the value. But you need to take time for it. And for me, if you're not able to quantify the value, whatever you do has no use. You're producing waste because you have no clue what you work for. It starts with the value, nothing else. And that is when you do a delivery, a product, because so a question if you replace software by product or service, yeah, that would be nice, right? But it needs, that product or that service needs to serve a value that you're looking for. That's the purpose. And if you don't have it, we're not going to make it, because then you're producing waste. That's what you do.
And just to be like, for me, value doesn't have to be a monetary thing. Value could be financial savings. It could be growth in the market. There's broader categories rather than just that singular number. There's a whole heap of things that you can kind of like explore and be able to weigh against the kind of the effort of doing those things.
Of course, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
surprising how often it's not clear though. You go somewhere and people are running around and everybody's busy, but they're not really quite sure why they're doing what they're doing, or the purpose of it. What are their objectives? What is the value of what they're building?
And this is where it starts, right? So for me, I mean, the talk is here about, okay, what about that manifesto 20 years later? And I think a lot of organizations work to get agile, but they still have a long way to go, because that delivery means that every time box you deliver to production. Now you tell me how many of your clients as an agile coach that you know that go to production at the end of every sprint. Yeah, they have very often they have a sprint for development and then a sprint for test and maybe a sprint for something else, right? Still, and I don't say that's the wrong approach, but that's only a stage that you have to go through. You can't go to, to delivery in sprints in a week or in 2 weeks, right? That's a process where you have to work to, but that should be the dot on the horizon. And most organizations don't even go there. So I think, I always say, if you want to say, okay, the manifesto is outdated, okay, show me that you do it, really, that you do it. And I think most organizations have a long way to go.
Yeah,
that's a good challenge. I think there's another element to this, though, isn't there? So in terms of sort of helping an organization to become agile, I mean, I think we sort of touched a little bit on the technology there, Ari, in terms of being able to release to live every sprint. But it goes beyond technology, right? So it's not just for IT, and I think we've sort of touched on this a little bit in terms of service and software. So what are people's thoughts on that in terms of where we adopt these agile ways of working in organizations?
Everywhere. Yeah, you go, Ellen.
I was going to say that kind of like links into Scott Howard's question about, when do we swap out the word software for delivery of product? And I think that's the kind of the thing that everybody has on their mind. It's the one thing that I hear most of the time. And, absolutely, I probably would make that exact change out for itself. But equally, skilled coaches and, when you start learning more about it, you can kind of like look past that. Yes, it's not all the way about software, but, Scrum is definitely taking off in the whole kind of like enterprise, in the whole of the business. And I think it's about, looking past the words and actually reading the sentiment that sits behind it. And it's about having working stuff that we can physically actually demonstrate in line with what Ari said every couple of weeks or whatever your sprint length is to demonstrate that value.
I would like to say, because I know that we have that word software in that manifesto, and I know that that's most likely the reason that we start in the IT departments, with working agile. But I worked agile outside IT from day number one in the mid-90s, because what I call full delivery, right? And yes, I have a team working on software, or maybe two, but I also had teams working on marketing and communication and working on the audit trails. And that has nothing to do with the IT, but it had to happen. And it was all working on one backlog, if you like, right? And so, and it's all been done. So if you ask me, is it possible? Come on, that's a no-brainer. It's been done for 25 years, right? So, and I think that's the one that we need to go to is, being open to adopt other people's best practices, to listen and learn, and not necessarily experimenting, because that's already been done, but adopt and try how you can make it work for yourself instead of saying no.
But given the opportunity to make a revision, Ari, would you swap out the word software or keep it there?
I think Okay, I know there were a lot of people. Like I was this week in a session with Bob Martin and James. They are and John Kern. They are developers every single day, still today, right? So that word software popped up. It's my background as well. Is logical, but I should have at least suggest, guys, let's kick it out because software doesn't do anything. It's a product or a service that brings the value as a whole. And I didn't, so you can blame me for that one. Yeah.
I definitely do. I hold you entirely responsible.
But there's no reason, like certainly when I do my training, I kind of like bracket it after the software bit, you know, all working stuff, you know, product or service or whatever it is. But yeah, it's definitely one of the words that I kind of would like to change, but you know, I can live with it.
I think you can live with it, and you can caveat it when you're doing your training, when you're introducing it to people. And as you say, a good agile coach can do that. I think it would be reticent of me to suggest that it doesn't in some way act as a deterrent, though. You will have a situation where someone will read that manifesto for software development. They say, oh, it doesn't apply to me. I'm not in software. And therefore they'll immediately get their defenses up, and then, you know, there'll be a bit of a resistance to change. So for me, you know, it absolutely applies to all areas. There's lots of value that they can driven from using agile practices outside of traditional software development and IT. But if I could change that language myself, I definitely would adopt something a little bit more wide-reaching.
The point is,
I have exactly. Sorry, Harry. Go on.
What I wanted to say about, you know, doing agile. My teams that are doing transformations, the coach teams, work agile. What they do has nothing to do with IT. They work agile. We train HR departments, you know, to do recruitment campaigns in an agile way, or marketing communication departments to organize events in an agile way, and things like you know, for the test driven and pairing and visual management in those processes and having stories and definition of done. It all works, right? And it's all been done. It almost feels like that kind of discussion is a little bit, you know, waste of the time because it's all there, but a lot of people just don't know.
Are we not a little bit blinkered in our thinking? Because I mean, I've been around in the agile world for a while, you even longer, Ari, but are we just not kind of like used to it now, and therefore we look past it? If we look at it through somebody's eyes who's coming fresh into this, the first time they've experienced it, worked in completely different ways, I can definitely see what Chris is saying, that it can be something that is off-putting. I think after a while you just become kind of like immune to some of these things and look past that.
I agree that, you know, I always say, even when we bring proposals for transformation work, we talk very agile, much more than the client. And before you know it, the gap between the two is too big, and you misunderstand each other. It's a serious problem, Helen. It is. I see Robin, you know. Problem. Yeah,
That's pretty nice.
Us as agile coaches, we have our kind of own like cultish language, don't we, where, you know, luckily we don't have too many acronyms or anything like that, but yeah, you're definitely right. Organizations can get lost because what we do every day we take for granted.
Have you not seen the Deloitte subway map of agile? There's so many acronyms on there. You could sit there and you could lose yourself in it and just scrolling through that for ages and ages. There is so much words and terminology out there. Agile is massive as a landscape.
And it's also
why they make the big bucks.
I see a question here in the Q&A, and it says it's about the face-to-face and the fact in the world where we live in today, right? And it's okay. How do you do this? When we wrote the manifesto, we talked about face-to-face. Why do you face-to-face? You have the verbals, the paraverbals, and the non-verbals, so you have better communication. Instead of then you do remote and written. Okay, that's great. We never said you had to be body-to-body. We are doing now face-to-face. And it works fine, right? It's taking things, you know, for the purpose that they have been written down. And if you go back to that source, then you can say, okay, no, that works. I always say, you know, when you do remote, the only thing that you miss is each other's smell. Not necessarily a problem, right? So
no.
There's a few of those things where it's kind of literal, you know, like Helen was just giving an example there. I mean, another one for me is contract negotiation. Yeah, I often have to explain that can be any kind of specification. That could be, you know, how you've written this, your requirements as if they're a contract. You know, it's. So if I was going to change a word, that would be one that I would sort of broaden out a bit. I'd maybe say collaboration over specification or something like that, rather than contract negotiation, because it's got a very potential for misunderstanding. It's another one that's taken very literally.
It's probably worth reflecting that there's never going to be a perfect utopian version of any manifesto that everyone takes exactly the right context and interprets in the same way. There's various words that I would probably alter in the manifesto myself. And I know that the desire was to keep it simple. That's why there's 4, 12. You know, I've seen other iterations. Agile 2, for example, it's got 43 principles, which is a bit extreme, you know, and could probably make it difficult for people to get to grips with it especially when new to things. Is there a perfect version? No, there probably isn't. Is there softer language? And maybe what's missing is a little bit more context as to what was intended by the certain words that were used. I often say, for example, if there was something that I would change right away, it would be individuals' interactions over processes and tools should become individuals' interactions enabled by processes and tools. Because I think in particular in this modern world we're in today, we need those processes and tools in place to enable us to be successful. Maybe it's just the overall qualifier that I'm not a fan of, because I know it can be taken in the wrong way to mean, oh, we're just going to do that, not that. Yeah. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on it.
What about talking, like we've talked about things that we've changed. What's the one that you still love today? Because the one that I still love today is simplicity out of the principles. What's the simplest thing that we can do? You know, we've talked very much about what we change. What's the thing that you still love today?
I really like the 12th principle around taking the time to reflect and actively look for ways to improve our ways of working. Because I think we're almost sort of taught from quite a young age not to do that. We're taught that there is a process, there is a right way to do things, and once you've got the right way, keep on doing it that way, rather than this sort of constant reflection on that and examination of that, and then taking time and taking deliberate actions to look for better ways of doing things. So I think for me that's one of the favourites from my perspective. But I'm going to
go with number 1, customer centricity, and the reason is because I feel this one is often not applied as well as it could be. If I was to think about how many metrics there are about velocity and lead times and all those things, but how often is there many metrics out there actually track how often you engage with your customers, how often do you speak with them and understand what they're looking for? So that's probably a favourite of mine. I think it's one that still needs a lot of work.
Well, the point is you talk about the first principle, Chris, don't you? And we do not talk about, in the principle, we do not talk about engaging with the customer. We say that we like a happy customer. That's the most important thing, right? Now, the point is, how do you get there? And what you see is that most people implement Agile with a product owner between the team and the business, which is exactly what is not helping you, because you have via communication, and that's the one thing that you don't want. But it gives people the best help they can get people don't like change, and it's reflecting the situation in the past. And when you work Agile in my way, you meet your client, the business people, 2 times a week, the real business people, right? And that's something else. And that means that you have to change. And Leo is asking, what do you do with people who don't want to change? Well, most people don't want to change, but don't focus too much on the naysayers, because they will drain you, but help the naysayers, help them forward, and let that success promote itself.
It's probably important to just realize that change is not natural. It's not what humans are designed to do. We've evolutionarily designed to seek homeostasis. When we're cold, we seek warmth. When we're hungry, we seek food. It's just natural to seek that equilibrium and be comfortable. So when change happens, it is uncomfortable, and a lot of people don't like that. So it does take a bit of easing along. And yeah, I think focusing on the yay-sayers, getting people on board, and then getting other people to tell that story can definitely help.
I think a lot of what we come against is, emotional resistance. This is the way we've always done things. This is the way that I know how to do my job. So lots of the coaching that we do, I always say that probably 10% of my job is teaching people agile or lean methods. Most of it is about we're helping people kind of go through that change, helping to grow confidence in them, giving them support and mentorship and knowledge. And people need to feel supported so they can overcome these things and then be able to open themselves up to change. You have to make it safe for them to do something different and to learn from that.
The biggest problem when we wrote the manifesto is that when we wrote the manifesto, we were all open to change because we've been working on change since, the moment that, in my case, 7 years when we wrote the manifesto. But most people just don't like change. And that going into that direction is the big issue all the time, whatever you do, right? So be prepared for it. I always say being an agile coach is not a nice job. You work with people who don't want to, right? Every day, very often. Very often.
Well, that's the thing I enjoy most.
I love it when they say to me, you have to prove to me that this agile thing works. So you have to prove it. How many times have they said that to you?
Yeah, or the one that I heard very often, and this is already years before the manifesto, when I did my own trainings and masterclasses at the time. People, after 2 days of session, they would say, yeah, it's really a good idea, but it doesn't work for us. Oh, okay. Did you ever try it? No, but it doesn't work for us, right? And this is where it starts, and that's where we need to go. And we struggle with that. And in terms of trying to find a way, to make it work in an organization. I mean, that's the coach job, but we already talked about it. And I didn't realize this at the time, right? When I started doing this in the mid-90s, because for me, it felt natural. But now later on, you can see, okay, it's the leadership team that makes or breaks, because if they can stop everything that's going on in an organization, they can rewind every change that's ever been made within weeks if they like, and it happens.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been there, haven't we, where we've been sent to an organization and told to, help coach the IT teams to become better, faster, more nimble at what they do. That's a common thing that coaches get asked to do. But to build on that, in reality, the problems that I see in organizations is the kind of the decision making and the leadership, the strategy of the business, how work flows down from that strategy, how that comes through, how the value gets attributed, and how that gets broken down before it goes into the teams. Teams that love working, teams want to do their stuff, they're flexible. Over time, you can help them to achieve really great things. But if the environment around it is not very good, then that's a key challenge. And that's the one that I probably spend most of my time trying to solve.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think it comes back to that sort of point on people don't like change. I'm not sure that's always true. I think people don't like change being done to them. I think people are happy to change if they can see the benefit that it brings. But I think that's part of the education. And like you say, Helen, quite often the people on the ground are very happy to change their ways of working because they're frustrated with the fact that they can't get stuff done. But then you do then face a sort of wider organizational challenge, which is that the rest of the organization isn't used to the slightly unusual way that these guys are working, and why they're doing it like that. And I'm not seeing the reports I'm used to seeing, and so then the organization can come in and kind of suffocate those sorts of initiatives. And I have seen that happen in my own experience, sadly, where teams have adopted the new ways of working, but ultimately they get squashed by the wider organization.
Which thing in agile working that we underestimate, and I underestimated for years, is that the deep change that you have to bring. Agile working itself, I always say, is very simple, right? It's very easy. It's very efficient communication, the right people empowered. But beneath that, you need to change organizational structures. You need to change so many things, and that's the problem. And then that's already difficult. But also, every one of us, the only things that we have with us is our past, right? And things go wrong. You go into agile working, and it's not brilliant right away because you have to get into it, right? And managers expect after 2 Scrum trainings that you are sort of a god and you can do everything instantly superb. When it's not working, they start pushing you. But the only thing that you have is old school solutions. So I call it innovating backwards. You're going into a transformation, and after a year you come back, they use all the agile words and the words, and they work completely waterfall. And that's a problem. Those reflexes need to be built. You know, reflexes for agile working, innovating forward, need to be built. That takes time. And that's the problem with agile working. It's the layer, the paradigm layer under the way of working that is asking for much more than we think all the time.
I'm going to move us on a little bit. I mean, we've talked a little bit about being responsive to our customers, and we have 39 odd people on the call, and they've been raising a few questions. So I wondered if it's worth taking a moment to have a look at some of those questions that have come in. And we have one, the one that's sort of bubbled to the top at the moment is from Leo saying, how about Agile at scale these days? Can you comment, please? And do we think the manifesto addresses that, for example?
Well, the point is that the manifesto did not address teams only or something. It doesn't make explicit, right, if it's at scale or not. But where most people go into Scrum, which is focusing on the team, people think Agile is for teams only. Bollocks. Not true. Never been. I did Agile with 20 people, 30 people. The largest team I ever had was 94. You could call it a tribe these days, right, if you like. So it's more about how do you limit yourself in thinking than it's there, right? And Agile at scale needs to happen. It's not easy when you have 50,000 people working in the same company.
Yeah, I'm trying to see, look through just reading through, just seeing if there's anything specific around trying to remove dependencies or, you know, silos, handoffs, that sort of waste. I guess some of it is it's implicit. You can read things in that way. You could say simplicity, keep things simple. So yeah, right. Don't design your organization so that you need lots of handoffs to get a piece of work out to the customer. Working software, you know, if it's just working locally, is that any good? If you've got a big organization and you've got a long tail from when the developers finish to when something gets deployed into production is actually in a customer's hands. Yeah, so all those scale type problems, I think they are covered if you read it carefully. I don't think they're excluded, but it's just not explicit.
I think for me, when I do scale these days, I start blending it with other methods. For me, where not all organization can create beautiful, lovely feature teams where they have every skill in the team to be able to get work done. You know, fantastic if you're a Barclays Bank, but, you know, if you're not a big company with loads of cash and actually you've got like budgets to think about, and maybe you have a central shared service that has to cover multiple things because there's not a constant need, you do have to find ways to be able to coordinate through, you know, policies, through understanding how much work those teams can take from you at any given point in time. And so when I start scaling out where I do have shared services and where there's levels of coordination that need to happen, then I typically look to, you know, it's not going to be a surprise, I'm that Kanban girl, I look to Kanban to be able to help scale. You know, it's already a kind of like scaled method. You know, you start small, you grow it, and you can use those systems to help look at your portfolio, how the work flows in, how it gets broken down. It doesn't matter to me whether you're a Scrum team or a Kanban team working at the team level, because we're all driving towards the same goals, isn't it? It's about that coordination, and I think that's the bit that quite often is missed when we start talking about Agile at scale. And if anyone in the audience, Leo, if you're interested, definitely check out some of the work by Klaus Leopold on flight levels, which starts to look at how you can scale differently within your organization. Equally, Less has some really nice principles about how you have single product owner working with multiple teams to be able to deliver products. You kind of have to take the best out of all of these things to be able to achieve what you want to do. But if you try and draw a picture, that becomes safe, and then it becomes a monstrosity.
Yeah, I think when I think of scaling these days, often obviously the most common one that seems to come up is safe, and it's got that lovely, I say lovely, with heavy derision under my breath, but lovely visual there. That's a bit of a monolith, and it has everything perfectly laid out with all these tiers, and everything fits delightfully into a little package, and it feels like a way for companies that have already got a lot of bureaucracy to just copy and paste, you know, to work with something very clear and easy that they know has worked before. But I don't think it works that well in practice. And I'm not saying safe doesn't work in practice, but I'm saying it's not just copy and pasting. I think for me, coming back to what Helen was saying, what works and what I've seen work is borrowing bits and pieces from various different options, various frameworks out there, to find out how you can best manage that process, how you can manage dependencies, ensure that you get fast feedback loops between things without things falling through the cracks. You've got to be pragmatic about things. You know, not everything fits into a perfect feature team or a perfect component team or a delightful release train or whatever term you want to call it. It's about being pragmatic, and I'll always come back to experiment until you find what works for your company.
Yeah, and what I would like to say is, if you have an organization where people are really poorly communicating with each other and the collaboration is low, Agile doesn't change that. You know, you have a platform where you can do it, but you have to get the people along with it. And that's Michael McGowan was asking a question, you know, about organization struggle, you know, has it been for the last 20 years? Yes, and the 50 years before that as well. It's not changed, right? We are still, you know, suffering with the same human problems, like Helen was mentioning, you know, resistance to change. It's still there, right? But that's the coach job. And I think that change is different from what we intended about Agile working when we wrote the manifesto, because the manifesto is not about how to make the change. This is more like, okay, you know, that's what you should focus on. Good luck with it, right? Sort of a declaration of independence, but how you see democracy, hey, that's up to you. That kind of thing. And that means that there's space for everybody, you know, to find their own way, but that's not always making it easy, because it's so nice when it's totally pre-described for you, and it's not.
And this is where I'd love the additional context to be made clear to everyone who may use the manifesto, that it's not intended to be this perfect, follow this and it will work for you. It's some guidelines. It's here's where you should start focusing, and then interpret it and find out what works for you. Don't just do it and hope it's going to fix everything.
Because what it's meant to do is to show all of the problems within your organization, and actually we have to have leadership and we have to have autonomy to be able to solve some of these challenges. And if we're not solving those things, then no method is going to help you. You have to tackle that stuff heads on.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not magic or something, right?
No, but and I kind of sometimes, me and my friend always have a laugh about this, but I've kind of got a bit of a dream client at the moment, because everything is easy, and I think, what's the difference there? And it's because the leadership has grown up in the agile ways of working, and they are now the C-level people within that organization, and so therefore they understand that mindset. They don't have anything historical to revert back to when the times are getting tough. And so does the group think that, you know, at some point the kind of curve will change, and the people that were kind of like the developers become the CTOs, and, you know, the people like us become the CEOs of those organizations, and therefore there's a natural shift in that mindset because we've grown up in that agile way? Do you think that would make a fundamental difference? And my God, how many years are we going to have to wait for that?
Yeah.
It's already been 20.
At least another 7 years.
Yeah, that's a nice thought, Helen. I think some people, it depends on the organisation, doesn't it? Sometimes to get on, you get assimilated into the way they do things, and there's a way to progress in the organisation. So I would say that it's heavily dependent on that.
It's an interesting one, because I think
it's the direction of travel.
Sorry, I spoke over you. It's interesting though, because it kind of answers in some ways, well, it addresses to a certain extent the next question, which is around, really, I think if I'm summarizing, Leo, it's organizations say they want to be agile, but when push comes to shove, they're not actually prepared to make the investment in terms of, you know, spending time doing training, giving teams the flexibility and the autonomy really to change their ways of working. And as a result, you know, the manifesto and practices aren't applied correctly. I mean, what can we? Well, just sort of, do we have any? Can we sort of say anything about our experiences of that and how we sort of worked to address that?
I think you have to contract that situation. You kind of need to work with the leadership, and, you know, not only am I assessing their coachability, but the organization's coachability. I'm kind of making them aware that actually we're going to find out loads of stuff. Some of that's going to be teams, some of that stuff is going to be them. How much are they prepared to change? How much are they prepared to invest in this? And actually it's about, not just selling them, an outcome. It's kind of what are they prepared to invest to be able to get the goals that they want to be able to achieve. And I think smart people will contract that right up the early stages. And if they're not going to be bought in and invested in that, then that kind of gives you a real clue on how things are going to go.
Yeah, for me, I'd be asking some questions of those who are asking for this change. And I'd be saying, okay, so are you happy with how things are currently? Right? Is everything perfect right now? Odds are, no, it isn't. All right, so we want improvements. Okay, if you want improvements, you need to change. You can't. I always come back to one of my favorite quotes: Einstein's definition of insanity. If you do the same thing over and over and expect different results, that's insane. So if you want improvements, you have to change your variable. You have to gauge how it works and learn from it. You can't just keep doing the same things and expecting different results.
I think we underestimate the power of habits, and we underestimate the power of old habits that are embedded in organizations. And again, we're talking about the change. And in the past, I would say, like 20 years ago, I would say if I do a project in this agile way, I do sort of a mini transformation, because I have this team that needs to work in an agile way, but the environment of the team that needs to collaborate with me in that organization. And I know, when I go out, they will disassemble the team and they go back to normal, but I need to do this. And you can see where your focus should be, right? If you want to make that happen, if you want to make that delivery successful. And that means for me always, we can talk about it over and over again, but it's the management, because the leadership team, number one, has to role model agile working, because if they give a traditional push, they will get a traditional response. But also that change that you're asking for, the people in the teams cannot make it, right? That change can only be, let's say, authorized, let me use this word, by leadership teams. So you need them in. And that's the big part, because they expect that the rest will do the work and they can sit and stay. So
I'm finding more and more that's a crucial early conversation on an engagement is with the sponsor about, where the change is going to happen, and that perception, if they think it's all going to be for the teams, then, then that's a bad smell.
That's where it starts. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the team charter concept, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be at the team level. I will do this with a group of leadership as well, and say, right, what is it that you want to achieve from change? What vision do we have here? What are our goals that we want? What do we need from one another to make it happen? And if we start to see, things like Robin was just saying, then it's a bad smell. We can kind of try and nip that in the bud early and get everyone aligned as to what we are really trying to achieve.
But I think we kind of need, like, as a coach helping an organization, you kind of need a seat at the table, the top table. You need the ear, you need the voice. And many of the mistakes I've made it more than once when I've gone into an organization, I've just gone in there and I've done that team stuff. And when you then need to make changes elsewhere, you have no voice in that party. You're just that team coach, or that person who does that and makes things better. You need to kind of set yourself apart, and you need to show that you can do that enterprise level and you can do that at team level, but start with that enterprise and then kind of build those relationships, because then you do have that seat at the table and you can help enact change.
I think that's good. I think that helps. And there's another question that's come in actually by Ollie Stratton. So as a member of the team, how can you best handle management structures above you that aren't agile? And I think you're right. I think you need to get in amongst them and sort of bring them with you. It all comes back to, if the leadership aren't going to be on side with this, then we have to sort of address that head on.
Yeah, I think this is connecting with Ian Thompson has the question, when you're coaching with tech teams and you have the HR team and to support, how do you do this? And I think that's the problem. Your approach should be on the whole thing. Yeah. So you have a transformation backlog. You just don't get in and start coaching. No, you have a backlog that you work on towards the value that you see as an outcome of the transformation. And part of that backlog will be epic stories on the level of HR, where you transform the HR department, where you help the HR to not only understand their job, but also to be able to to work agile themselves and to facilitate the organization from their side to work in an agile way.
And like I said, this is where there's an approach that Scrum at Scale uses around this. And they call it the executive action team. They've got a team of leaders who are empowered and they have the authority. And it's often the C-suite or the tech leadership team or something to that effect. And you have a coach acting as a Scrum master to them, and they have a backlog that they're processing through, and they're responsible for removing enterprise level impediments that are coming up from the teams below. I think. And if you're observing this sort of dysfunction coming up to what Leo was saying about structures above the Scrum teams not being in an agile way, the only way we can begin to change is by calling it out, right? And you need to get others to try and help call out as well. If you keep ignoring it, again, it won't change.
Yeah, and I think it's making it visible, because often it's often these negative impacts are not understood by the people who are causing them. They're well intentioned, their behaviours. They're not trying to be bad people or make your life a misery. It's just they might not understand the impacts of certain behaviours or structures. So trying to evidence that is quite important too. If you come with data or some way of making the impact clear, I think that's one way to to help with that level.
Okay, I'm aware of time. I think we've probably got time for one more question. I'm going to try and combine a couple into one. So there's Jason Bardwaj has asked about running Agile, and do you think it'll help if clients and customers are also running Agile? And in fact, Mags has asked, how would we set up Agile if our third parties are, if we're working with third parties who aren't necessarily Agile? So it's that sort of question where we interface. We've talked quite a lot about interfacing within other parts of the organization, but we also have to interface outside of the organization, right? So how can we sort of tackle that by using these Agile Manifesto principles and values?
Can I say that close collaboration with your client is what we said in the manifesto? So that's what you have to do, period. And that's maybe not easy to get it started. But the close collaboration, and not the via communication, but the close collaboration with your client, so you can have the very short feedback loops. That's what we talk about. That's what needs to happen. Third parties, especially in offshore, okay, that's not easy, eh? But it can be done, but it's not easy.
Yeah, and coming back to, I guess, Ari's point earlier about like a mini transformation, I'd be approaching a new engagement involving a third party or a new client in a similar sort of way. I'd be looking to build it. Get the expectations early that we want to work in an agile way, contract in an agile way, get those good agile practices built in, and do that. Have that conversation early so that you can set yourself up for success.
But they're not always brand new like people. They're maybe historical contracts that you've got long-term people. So that's probably more what we get to see. So what would we do in that instance?
Well, again, I think it would be the starting point is absolutely a conversation, right? So we appreciate there are sometimes contractual obligations, ways of working that are deeply embedded within master service agreements and all sorts of things like that that can come in the way of things. But unless you start the conversation about trying to get towards the outcome you're looking for, it's always going to remain that in that shape. So have a conversation with your client, with your third party. Reassert the desire to move towards a more agile way of working. If it can't fit within certain models because of contractual things, there's certain ways you can get around that. I think you've got to start with a conversation. You can't just ignore it.
And just to come back to the manifesto, it's about that collaboration. Mm-hmm. So even though they're third parties, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to treat them as a separate entity. They can be an extension of our team. They're there to help support us. We can still contract as a team on how we want to work together. We can do user story mapping. We can create user stories. We can do all of the things that you do in each of the different methods by working closely and collaboratively together. And you can actually have a really quite rich partnership. Quite often contracts shoot us in the foot, and I hate it when you see velocity in a contract. Oh my God, how many times have I seen that? These are not good things. You have to work out how you're going to get your best from your partner And that may mean that we may need to collaborate on roadmaps. We may need to understand what our critical paths are. We may need to be able to manage those dependencies. Maybe we all get in a virtual room and talk about what those dependencies are and map them out. But it's all about that communication. If you treat them as an external black box system, then they're going to treat you like the back, and you're going to get traditional deliveries. You kind of need to break down those boundaries, in my opinion, and you need to treat them as an extension of your organization, because that's what they've been paid to do.
You need to be clear about what working software means. If you were talking about that as the primary measure of progress, does it mean they've chucked it over to you, or is it working in your customer's hands, deployed to production? So I mean, if that's depends how you set up, how you define what working is as well. So that'd be a consideration if you're setting up the contract. And
ultimately, is it valuable, right? It can work, but it's valuable. And I think you're right. I like your point on the conversation, Chris. It's a conversation about how do we arrive at a shared outcome, right? It's actually a shared sense of purpose, which can then bring the team together and help them deliver something genuinely valuable for our customers.
And it will likely be a difficult conversation, but it's better to have it, get out of the air, acknowledge that it's there. It's an elephant in the room. This is going to be a barrier to us getting where we want to be. How can we work together? How can we collaborate? How can we get to that and work together to do so? Okay, guys, thank you very much. Listen, I'm aware of time. We've come up on time. So what do we think then in terms of the answer to the question? Do we think the Agile Manifesto is still fit for purpose?
Yes, I do.
I mean, there's always going to be things we want to change, but does it still work? Does it give us the still sentiment? Is it still making successful change? Yeah, definitely.
I'm very happy with the panel's outcome.
I would say I think it absolutely does. I'm not here to change the Declaration of Independence or anything like that. It's an artifact in history. It serves its purpose and still helps us in a lot of ways. Would I change certain wordings? Would I maybe add a bit more context in certain ways? Personally, yes. I do think there can be a lot of dogmatism about how the manifesto is applied. I think there can be a lot of misinterpretations that result in dysfunctional behavior. But does it serve a purpose in 2021? Yes. Would I add a few more things around experimentation and psychological safety, which we know are really important in 2021? Yes.
Excellent. Okay, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to add, I'd just like to say thank you everybody for your time. I've really enjoyed the discussion, so thank you for everybody for getting engaged in that. And well, hope to see you at another Agile 20 Reflect event soon.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed
Thanks, everyone.